everybody just thinks better interest rates are right around the corner. And when the Fed does nothing but perpetuate that narrative, it becomes self-fulfilling at that point.
30% of China's economy is real estate related. China took some very tough medicine to survive, and it meant a shrinking on the world stage, but they have landed the plane.
In China, installing OpenClaw is called raising lobsters.
AI is living in a digital world. It can ingest photos and images and stuff, but it doesn't see and interact with all of the physical aspects, that real estate is.
Episode 87 of the award-winning Market Moves with Mark and Jeff, two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times. Jeff, we are in the tight end jersey number portion of the podcast so far. Taylor Swift fans will be very excited for episode number 87 here, but it is basketball season, and my Rockets are a total mess. We are without our star, Kevin Durant, but finding ways to not get eliminated, down 3-0, all the way back to 3-2, coming home to play a game. So I've been having a lot of fun watching. I'd like to watch more during the year, but I do kind of enjoy NBA playoff basketball when my team is around. So I'm kind of excited watching that.
Well, good for you. My Utah Jazz have been the center of tanking stories this season, so we've had nothing to cheer about. And admittedly, I'm a bit of a fair weather fan. I mean, it has been a lot of fun, in years past when they've been in playoffs and that sort of thing to kind of get caught up to it. I mean, unless you're really a fan of the sport, playoff basketball, NBA, kind of like March Madness with the college basketball thing, like it's fun to watch when something's on the line, but when it's one of 80 odd games in a regular season or something, I have a hard time making the time and frankly, drumming up the interest to watch a lot of that stuff. So yeah, my team's not in it, unfortunately, but I can cheer for the Rockets for you.
My 10-year-old's obsession with sports is reviving my obsession with sports. So college baseball, college basketball, NBA, and MLB are kind of back on my radar here. So loads of wasted time coming up here, Jeff. So, well, very good. Boy, it is, I saw somewhere, we won't get into artificial intelligence first, Jeff. We'll get into real estate and topics around that. But yeah, I saw someone saying that you basically need to be unemployed to stay up to date or current with all of the artificial intelligence and business news these days. That feels like the case. I have personal interest, I guess, in the Elon Musk, Sam Altman, whatever it is, court battle that's going on right now. I think that's a really interesting discussion, but just so much. We have different articles that are coming out or studies that are talking about the impacts of AI. We have others saying that, you're trying to get AI out there, but what's really the ROI for big companies? It's just this difficult tangle, I guess, in trying to make heads or tails of it.
It really is. And boy, that you must be unemployed to keep up with this stuff for sure resonates. I mean, it maybe becomes a theme of the podcast here because that's about as valuable as the podcast is at times, it feels. But yeah, I mean, joking aside, it really is the rapid rate. In fact, I saw a graphic that I didn't save to share here, but I think it was highlighting the number of searches for OpenClaw just massively spiked, like on Google, right? And so just massively spiked through April and then was dropping off a cliff again. And it's like, I don't think that means OpenClaw's like going away necessarily, but there's just this incredible interest in it. Everybody's searching for it. And then it's almost, either you've learned what you're going to, or you're diving deeper on the research or something, or you're on to the next shiny object or whatever. And boy, it's really, really hard to keep up from day to day and week to week with what's happening in the space of business and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and our industry isn't immune to it, Jeff. It may not be Elon versus Sam Altman, but I did see a headline kind of coming across LinkedIn with prop tech appraisal behemoth True Footage suing a company called AutoMax. I don't know what all that is. We won't be covering that here, but I think. Just one of many examples of all that is going on right now. There's a lot of posturing, getting ready for a better interest rate environment. We've been waiting for that for a long time. You see that a lot in the marketplace. And, this is happening in all industry here. And How much of the change are people posturing for that is more of a intermediate or temporary change? I don't know. It's really, really hard to digest what's going on and accurately predict much of anything.
Yeah, I'm not very good at predicting. I wish I were. But the one thing that does stand out to me is, and I think the historical context is important. We are at still such like depressed levels of overall mortgage volume and real estate sales volumes, 30-year lows, that, whatever the future brings. I mean, even if you just got back to a historical average, not the crazy, 3% interest rate, COVID era spike in volume. That would be a major lift for all real estate professionals. And we've been here for a couple of years now. So it kind of feels like, man, is this the new normal? Are volumes just where they are now? Appraisers and many real estate professionals are worried about, what is AI going to do to my profession? Is there even going to be a need for me, or as many of my counterparts as there has been in the past? And predicting that, to your point, Mark, it's really hard to know. But I just think it's important to remember too that we're in a really low volume environment. So even if there is some offset in, a tech lift or whatever, there's still room to run as far as getting back to a historical norm. So, yeah, I mean, your guess is as good as mine as far as what the future holds. But, we've been living through, really sparse times as far as overall transaction volumes go. And every week, everybody keeps hoping that we're just around the corner from that, picking back up. There have been more false starts than I care to even count. But I think the likelihood is we will start to see, transactions increase. Dr. Yoon a few episodes ago was talking about, 2026 being the year of recovery. Then we have a war and all of the impact on interest rates there. So who knows, exactly what it takes to get there. But, if I were going to place a bet, I think it's reasonably likely that we do see volumes get back to at least what they have been in more recent years past.
Yeah, Jeff, you probably heard the same message from a different representative, but I think it was Danny Wiley from Freddie Mac that was talking about at the conference I was at. Hey, look, it's not us using appraisal waivers and all that. It is 30 or 40-year lows in total mortgage volume and applications, and and that really understates it. Is dramatic of a statement as it is, and we've covered this a lot on the podcast. It's been a long time since we've talked about it, but 30 or 40 year lows, but what was the population of the United States 30 and 40 years ago? A lot lower, I don't know, 15, 20% lower. So the mortgage application per citizen is just, dropped off a cliff, right? And so that's the stuff that we're experiencing here and finding our way through. So, a couple of topics on the real estate front to get through here that are kind of along this. First, let's get the Fed meeting that was and hardly anybody cared was coming. I think this was the last meeting of a Federal Reserve meeting led by Jerome Powell. Thank God. So what did we hear? What happened, Jeff? What are your notes?
Yeah, you bet. So, a lot of coverage, obviously, but a quick blurb from what I found on Yahoo article. Basically said, met Wednesday of this week. The decision was to hold interest rate, their target rate, short-term rate, steady at between 3.5% and 3.75%. I think that was widely anticipated. So the only points of interest were that the Fed governor, Stephen Moran, disagreed, preferring to cut by a quarter point, which notable. But then they had dissent kind of on the other side, not in favor of a rate increase, but as it identifies here, Cleveland Fed Beth Hammock, Minneapolis Fed Chair, Dallas Fed Chair, all supported maintaining rates, but they disagreed with this easing bias that was implied in their policy statement. Basically, so they ended up dissenting, basically meaning that rather than an easing bias, that they think that they probably ought to stay more firmly where they are. So you had one vote in dissent actually wanting an interest rate cut. You've got 4 basically dissenting, saying we don't think there's an easing bias, where we think we ought to plan to stay where we're at, going further into the future. And it was notable that this was the most dissent that they had since October of 1992 in any Fed chair or Fed meetings leading up to this point. It just, I think, a sign of the times that there are increasingly divergent opinions on where the economy is, where it's going, and what the right policy is.
Yeah, uncertainty. I think this represents, Jeff, and amazingly an increasing amount of uncertainty when we think we're heading to a place of more of it, at least from the Fed. And yeah, I think this is tied to what we opened with, talking about the needing to be a full-time job, keeping up with all of the change and the data points, the new data points that are leading to different prognostications of what is going to happen to the economy. We talked about Warsh's thoughts on the meaningfully deflationary impact of AI and how that sort of juxtaposes against inflation numbers and jobs and all of that sort of stuff. So it's hard to predict. And I think what it all points to is a resetting of the data that the Fed is going to use to make their interest rate decisions. I think they want to get to a place, at least the Kevin Warsh-led Fed, they want to get to a place that is less volatile or less change in terms of rates. But they want to use a more modern set of criteria to make the decisions as to where rates should be.
I think that's exactly right. And we'll see how it plays out. But my anticipation is that will lead to a little more stability and reliability in what's to come. And boy, even if it's not an interest rate that you'd like, if you figure you can plan on that being the case into the future, people just make decisions and actually move, as opposed to this constant, well, maybe we will cut next month, next cycle, next meeting. And so there's this perpetual wait and see mentality that just hurts everybody. And it probably has been a bit of a factor in these historically low transaction volumes that we were just talking about. Everybody just thinks better interest rates are right around the corner. And when the Fed does nothing but perpetuate that narrative, it becomes self-fulfilling at that point.
Yeah. These will be an interesting set of 45, 60 days for the Fed here. If Warsh is confirmed, it looks like it's heading that way. I think it was on the podcast last week, Jeff, that you said that one of the members of the Senate that we need a vote for to approve Warsh was basically saying, drop the lawsuit against Jerome Powell, and then I'll consider it. And that lawsuit has been dropped. So things are moving in the direction of confirmation for Warsh. I thought he had a pretty measured, capable testimony in front of the Senate the other day. So I think we're heading in that direction. So, the first meeting is going to be a real kind of eye-opening. What are we going to get here? What's this going to look like?
Yeah, exactly right. And on an update today, that his confirmation did make it out of the committee, the Senate Banking Committee. It's now on the floor for a vote. The vote hasn't taken place, but it's widely anticipated. Having cleared that hurdle of, I think it was Senator Tillis, if I remember right, he's basically approved it out of the committee, so it's likely to go forward at this point. Part of the drama now is Jerome Powell saying he's going to stay around. He's going to stay as a governor, not the chair, obviously, until he's confident that there's not a recurring or a bringing back up of the lawsuit that involved him and the cost overruns on the building remodel and all of that sort of thing. So, I mean, maybe interesting sideshow, but as far as the actual work of the Fed, I think that unless some other unanticipated obstacle comes up, the pathway is clear for Warsh to get in.
Yeah. All right. Well, another interesting note in the world of residential real estate is the acquisition of RE/MAX by Real Brokerage. Real Brokerage, who I didn't know a whole lot about, is kind of an AI play in real estate and in acquiring the network of RE/MAX. I think they did it for about $800 million. I think there's like 8,500 offices around the country from RE/MAX, if I read that right. But that was interesting. I mean, I think another sign of people posturing and getting ready for a different world and a different market. The network of brick and mortar, of analog, mixed with AI plays seems to be what a lot of folks are efforting for. Jeff, and we've had this view all along that, like in appraisal specifically, that it just sort of needs to be analog on some level because of the stakeholders' expectations, the requirements of precision, the disallowance for margins of error in what's done in the process one way or another. And so it's difficult to bring this stuff in. But this is kind of the way to marry it, I think, is this kind of thing. For those not familiar with Real, a lot of chat agents. Leo, I think, is the concierge for Brokerage. It's like an AI chatbot. And then Hey Leo, which is the same chatbot or similar chatbot, kind of meant for homeowners in their home search and kind of going through the process one way or another. And then a Zen platform, which is just a digital mobile platform for real estate offices, in assisting, helping one way or another. And so I have not used it. I don't know much about it. I just know what the intent is of what they're trying to do. It's sort of prop tech and trying to be a play there. And I'm not overly impressed with what I hear, frankly, from it. It's everybody's trying to implement AI in meaningful ways. What is the ROI that really brings home that use?
Boy, that's such a good question, and I think perspective. And I do see that as being one of the likely ways forward that AI gets integrated into these human relationship based businesses, and real estate sales has definitely been that. Somebody looking to list their home and sell it, or help find, buy the new home, lean pretty heavily on the relationship and the trust that they have with the agent, but adding a lot of the lift behind the scenes, to allow the agent to be more productive, more effective, provide better service than they might otherwise. I was just having this conversation with my brother, who's a real estate agent, saying, man, what could AI do theoretically for him that has to be done? A lot of it is communication around coordinating the transaction. You got a whole bunch of moving parts. If it's not the appraisal that you're worried about, you got to get home inspections done if those are opted for, title reports, and a lot of communication. Is this stuff on track? Is it done? Is it back? What are the results? Are we on track to close? There are just a million things that come up in really coordinating this transaction. And so, I don't see this real brokerage as removing the agent entirely from that transaction. But if you could make the agent's life and by extension, the buyer and seller's life easier, better, and more streamlined through the transaction, I mean, that probably is a win and a lift for everybody. You could have chatbots do all of it from A to Z, I guess. But, it seems that the approach there, and I'm seeing others take this approach too, is make the experience better overall, for the humans involved in the process, as opposed to, remove them entirely.
Well, we'll do our best to keep up with these major things. There's so many people making plays in this. I think you have to. You've got no other choice but to do this. And what is going to win? We've talked a lot about Open Door here, which is, really the same kind of play, but an alternative to the traditional agent relationship, not an enhancement of the traditional agent relationship like what Real and Remax are doing. And maybe there's a home for both of them. I don't know, but we'll keep close tabs on it.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, there's been a home for Amazon, digital buying, and Walmart, brick and mortar retail sales as well. And so I wonder if some of these other industries may settle out where there is a home for both. Maybe one emerges as the obvious winner, but I could see a kind of a dual reality, frankly.
Well, Jeff, we talked about the sorry state of U.S. real estate and the transaction volume. I thought kind of a story of interest for our listeners, certainly for you and I, is, I don't know, there's misery loves company, and it's always better to see a real estate market that's doing worse than yours, just to find some comfort that it could be worse. And we have a graph that has been circulating around the interwebs from the St. Louis Fed that puts a lot of data out, monitoring Chinese real estate prices that are now returning to a 30-year low. And this is fascinating from a number of standpoints. And I can't help but watch this or read this. There's a really interesting blog post kind of describing the situation in China from a blog post I had not heard of before, but it's called Rogue Macro. I'll see if we can share a link to that blog post, but kind of an interesting story about what's going on here. And the devastating impact that this chart that we're seeing on the screen, which is essentially that real estate prices are now below where they were in 2005. And, a steep increase from there to about, it seemed like Q3 of 2021, they were up, large, and are coming down. And so what has happened during that time is really interesting. The government has assigned a lot of growth. China generally, the Chinese citizen does not spend money. They don't consume at the same rate other countries consume. They kind of save and whatever else. But real estate has been a way for the Chinese population to invest and spend money. It's thought to be like you aren't marriage material as a man if you don't own a home. So, families were pooling money together to help their son buy a home so that they become marriage material, just as one example. A note from this article suggests that 30% of China's economy is real estate related. And, we would see these stories of these ghost cities that were being built and planned for. I think there was 50 or 60 million units in the country that sat vacant at the height, and, building these enormous ghost cities ready for migration. The story had been, we're urbanizing a lot of the country. You have all these rural citizens that are, moving to the city now and kind of going from third world to more middle class type thing. And that really stalled at some point. And we had companies, developers like Evergrande that were, flashy defaults and really big problems. They were enormous developers. And Chinese government was trying to get out in front of the overbuilt problem that they were running into. And so that directly hit these large companies. But, Jeff, we talked about the Japanese. I'm not sure many people listened to it, but we talked about the Japanese real estate market in the run up in the late 80s that ultimately resulted in the real estate collapse in the early 90s. And the same kind of thing is happening here. And I thought this was an amazing stat that the average home price, or in the large cities, Shenzhen, Beijing, et cetera, the average home price was routinely reaching 30 to 50 times the average household income. In London and New York, that typically sits at 8 to 12 times that normal range. And in the US, the average is 4 to 6. So this is an enormously expensive real estate. So yeah, Jeff, that's a long setup for what I think is kind of an interesting story, a sad devastation from a personal wealth perspective from the Chinese citizen. But any thoughts that come to mind as you're looking at this?
Yeah, I mean, a few for sure. The first one is you led this out with misery loving company. That might be the genesis or the birth story of this podcast in the first place, is you and I just needing a little bit of therapy every week. But one of the things that was interesting, or that I'm observing, as you're talking through that chart, is here in the U.S., rather than a massive price correction that China is overseeing. And in fact, on this chart that we're showing for anybody that may be listening, it's indexed, so this isn't actual home prices, but it's back down to, like you said, 2005 era level. On the index, it's like 87 or something. Yeah, 86, 87. It was as high as 113 or 14, on this index amount. But the rate of drop since about the third quarter of 2021 is where all of the losses have come out, where it had been a steady run up for 15 or 16 years leading up to that point. Here in the U.S., we haven't seen the prices correct, nearly to that extent. If anything, we're seeing very modest, price changes in certain segments of the country, that we've addressed. But the volume, just the number of transactions has fallen off the cliff. I mean, the number of mortgage transactions looks kind of like what this chart does for home pricing in China. And so it's just interesting to me. We've observed and talked a lot about this lock-in effect, that of people locked into ultra low interest rates and not wanting to move. And because the home pricing is so high, others aren't able to afford getting in. So the way that it's played out has been different, between China and the U.S. Now, is China a canary in the coal mine as far as what might happen with home pricing here? Maybe. I kind of don't think so. But the way that their economy has responded is definitely a lot different. And U.S. with immigration policy and like natural birth rates is falling off, but is still ahead of where China is as far as replacing its population, naturally, which tends to exaggerate, this trend, I think, in, lack of sales transactions, lack of buyers generally. So interesting to see how it, ends up playing out going forward. But that really stood out to me, Mark, as you were laying that out.
Jeff, I have to wonder. Is it Richard Warner was the economist talking about the credit creation? He's obviously much larger than this podcast, but I think it would be a fascinating discussion. This credit creation theory is essentially that lax lending standards, easy access to capital fuels an enormous run up in real estate. And China had every reason to do this. They are trying to come onto the world stage and be an equal of the United States in terms of like GDP prowess and military might, et cetera. And that was happening by enormous GDP growth, largely, not entirely, but largely fed by this real estate boom, at least internally in the country. And here we are in Q3 of 2021. They specifically, I think it's called the three red lines or something, if I'm reading the article correctly, but it is a change and a restriction in lending practices specifically to the developers. And this immediately led to this precipitous fall. And so it almost feels to me, Jeff, like the credit creation theory or phenomenon as it relates to real estate prices is playing out in real time. I think it's a fascinating thought in comparison to the Japanese markets and where we sit now. And I can't help but think, when you go back to one of my opening points that this blog post was making, which is the Chinese citizen just doesn't spend their disposable income. So that means that China relies heavily on external consumption of Chinese goods. And I've heard stories on that front of, China kind of funding a bunch of different car makers. They let there be clear winners and then they let that one go big. But, they'll make an enormous amount of cars that they can't possibly have demand for in their country. But then they will flood a European market or a United States market with a very inexpensive car. Like no one could build it that cheap. But they sort of build a loyalty segment, to kind of fix the cars and get new ones. And, they're building kind of brand loyalty that way. And so that's been the model. And so when you think about the tariffs and a kind of the plans that this administration has been going down that feel very strange, but boy, it feels like it's doubling down on the consumption problem, internal consumption problem that China has. In this devastating real estate market crash, which is a uniquely large percentage of the wealth of the Chinese citizen, given this is kind of one of the few things they invested in over the last 20 years. You've got a declining personal consumption spend in the country with somewhat of maybe a declining external consumption. So that just adds to the problem here. I think that's just interesting confluence of activities and headlines that we're piecing together on the podcast over the years.
It really is. And it's so fascinating to try to track what these confluent forces are. It reminds me a little bit, like you think back to the Cold War, and it wasn't atomic bombs that settled things between U.S. and Russia. It was economic forces and factors in large part that that ended up ultimately accounting for a lot of what how that ended up getting resolved. And I don't know how this plays out, but China, as you said, is trying to come onto the world stage and be a competitor and kind of an equal with the U.S. in economic and otherwise just kind of national and world might and dominion. And they've got challenges internally that may end up preventing that more than some stroke of genius that the U.S. does in trying to counter their coming onto the world stage. And I mean every country is dealing with challenges internally that they have to address. But it was fascinating to read through this article. I was glad that you found and shared it. And it's just hard to overstate. You think about 30 to 50 times the annual income as the cost of housing. Everybody's worried about this election is likely going to be influenced by affordability generally here in the U.S. And we're at a fraction of that, maybe a tenth of that in terms of housing affordability on average. Now, your high value areas on the coast are like you said, 8 to 12%. 8 to 10, 12 times the annual incomes. Certainly difficult as far as affordability, but not anywhere approaching what it peaked out at in China.
Yeah, man. And when you couple what appears to be a reality that you had these very expensive homes, culturally the son needs to own a home to be marriage material. And so you have multiple generations investing in that piece of real estate that is sinking. Boy, that's a compounding effect there that really could be problematic. So just concerning, all the way through. And the last piece, Jeff, the GDP chart, I thought that was interesting. Maybe to the extent anybody wants to keep up with global positioning within countries one way or another. Kind of hard to read, Jeff. I don't know if you could go into slideshow mode here to do that, but on the fly, we'll see if we can get it done. But the U.S. is something like 28% of global GDP, 26%. China is 16% or 17%. EU is 17%. But what's really notable is that Japan in the mid 90s was 18% of global GDP, now sits at 3.8%. And what this blog post was suggesting was that, China took some very tough medicine to survive, and it meant a shrinking on the world stage, but they have landed the plane. And the question outstanding is China willing to do that? I guess the answer is no. They're not willing to do that, but that's maybe what this is suggesting would need to happen to be able to land the plane when you consider the population collapse, real estate collapse, the personal consumption collapse, and even getting energy is difficult. So I don't know. I thought just kind of interesting to bring this point home, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I always find myself looking at these charts thinking, man, I'd sure love to know how they move forward. Because China's peaked, is this a blip on their upward rise, or is it the peak and them like reverting back down like what Japan did? Just interesting to watch. U.S. has been, consistently high. Interesting to note that it was outpaced by European Union nations for a brief period in right around 1990, but remains the world leader. It would be an interesting perspective as well if you looked at this on a per capita basis. China, way more people, and maybe that speaks to way more potentially for them to, continue to increase or this upward trend that they've been on. But, pretty big shifts over the decades as far as the way that these track up. So it'd be a fun one to watch and keep an eye on over time for sure.
Well, Jeff, there is your international residential real estate segment of Market Moves. And I think how this ties back to the U.S. One is a point I have felt and been making is that as unaffordable as the U.S. residential real estate market is today, by comparison to other markets, it is not that unaffordable, and there is room to support the unaffordability that sits there right now. And I think that does speak on some level, or maybe establishes a floor of how low can we go if real estate prices are going to need to drop.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense for sure.
All right, Jeff. Well, let's move on. Artificial intelligence here, right? That is the next set of topics. OpenClaw is we're having a lot of fun with. Tug, appreciate those that have followed. Find Tug Market Moves on LinkedIn and X. Maybe soon to be Facebook if we can figure out how to get that done. But really interesting. He's posting every day, kind of real estate stuff and creating conversation. We love that's going on here. Supporting the podcast is following them. Following Tug can really help. But OpenClaw is what's driving Tug, and we had kind of an interesting note of different perspectives on artificial intelligence, countries using it, et cetera, from the creator of OpenClaw in a TED Talk. And we had a short segment here that we were going to play to kind of lead a discussion.
Yep, absolutely. Again, on the fly. We'll see if I'm smart enough to make this happen, Mark. So here we go. Peter Steinberger is the one who'd created the OpenClaw initially. And this is him talking about how it's being received in various countries around the world. We thought it was fascinating.
In China, installing OpenClaw is called raising lobsters. Thousands of people were lining up at the Tencent office in Shenzhen to get their lobster installed. Shenzhen even gives out subsidies for people running businesses on OpenClaw. Now, if you install OpenClaw on your work machine, at least with the default settings, you might get fired. And then I met an entrepreneur in China who showed me a spreadsheet. Every employee, every day, one task automated by OpenClaw. If you miss too many days, you're fired. So fired for using it, fired for not using it.
There we go, Mark. So it's kind of fun to hear the creator of this thing that has just taken the world by storm, talking about his experience interacting with, some that are saying, hey, if you're using this because, and he didn't say this, but I'm sure it's born out of security concerns and other, concerns of maybe replacing workforce or whatever. You get fired if you use this thing on your work computer. But in other areas, the metric is if you're not using it enough to automate tasks to drive value for you as an employee, then you get fired for not using it enough. And fascinating to see the different perspectives. It reminds me a little bit of some of the topics you and I have touched on, Mark, and even that we talked about with Roy Meyer in the past of artificial intelligence in education, where some school systems are wanting to make sure kids aren't cheating and not using it at all, whereas other education systems, especially outside of the U.S., are almost an AI-first approach. Very kind of radically opposed positions on the very same set of technology.
Two thoughts come to my mind, Jeff. The first is Jensen Huang's NVIDIA interview that we talked about a few podcasts ago, saying almost the same Chinese perspective, which is that if his $500,000 software engineer is not spending $500,000 in AI tokens writing code, they might fire that software engineer because they are not working as efficiently as they could. Coding is a really interesting use case for that, because I think there is better boundary settings and kind of being able to silo off in a world where you can get real results, possibly. But it's just so it kind of mirrors what the Chinese are encouraging right now, at least according to the biased owner of OpenClaw, right? But the second thing that comes across to me is kind of what we've heard Chamath Palihapitiya say, which is that all this AI stuff, you get a long ways down the path, kind of like my view of what real Brokerage is doing with their chatbots and all of that. Like, okay, that's nice, it's buzzy. What are we really getting with this? And a stereotype is, and I don't. It's probably an offensive thought, and I don't even know if it has any truth to it. But a stereotype is a poorer quality product comes from China. I think that is, every year is less so true, if it was ever true. But I do wonder a little bit, Jeff, if our requirement for a quality solution that that addresses the problem permanently and with all without error. There's a juxtaposition there, I think, between maybe a Chinese perspective and that. I think the balance between the two, if each was a spectrum, like don't use AI because it's going to screw something up, and use it on everything, even if it screws it up. There's a right middle to find there to kind of push the boundaries one way or another. So because we haven't yet got to a place where OpenClaw, and it's probably user error, not the incapability of OpenClaw, but we haven't yet got to a place where I trust that a workflow will not need to be touched by me for the next 6 months and will just run the way it needs to run.
Well, especially if that workflow is interjected in critical business operations or something. And it's part of the reason we decided to start where we did, to learn how this works and how to spin up at least an OpenClaw agent. I mean, we don't want to screw things up and lose viewers or those that would support the podcast, but it's not going to take down a firm or like the operations there. And so, I think makes a lot of sense. There is the right balance. And, I hear a lot of people that are successful talk about having a bias for action. I mean, I'd rather learn by doing than sit back and plan forever. This perfection is the enemy of profit, success, like name the outcome. You learn by doing for sure, but there are definitely cautionary tales. I mean, I forget the name of the company. You can probably remind me, that had an AI agent, not necessarily OpenClaw, go in and delete their database. And so they had to go to like a 3-month backup. I think it was a company that supported rental car operations, and so incredibly painful. Those are the kinds of lessons nobody wants to learn firsthand. But it represents the reality of the risk that exists, by being an early adopter on this technology.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm reminded. I've got to go back and watch the series Silicon Valley because it was so premonition of what we're dealing with now, as vulgar as it is. The scene, so this is an OpenClaw or whatever, deleting a database, kind of going rogue. The same sort of thing happened in Silicon Valley. They had created an AI agent called Son of Anton that the owner of the company was coming to the software engineer saying, "What are you doing? This thing deleted all the code. It's broken. It's not working." And he's like, "Well, actually, I told it to remove all errors from the code. So technically, deleting all the code is accomplishing the goal I set for it." And so that was followed by, "Hey, software engineer, they just delivered 5,000 pounds of meat. What's up with that?" It's like, well, I guess I did ask it to build me a cheap hamburger or buy me a cheap hamburger. And so it was buying meat at bulk, right? But I think those are like just really illustrative points from 10 years ago that are describing some of the problems we have now, and you and I see this in working with Tug, is that what I think is a very clear instruction or job that I have set up with Tug ends up, it's not even a misunderstanding. It's a very practical understanding of the instruction I've given out. And I didn't understand how we would practically interpret what I said.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this whole vibe coding, aspect, and a word that we haven't heard as much lately is this prompt engineering, and it drives home to me how critical it is. If you're just asking a chat bot to tell me who won the game last night, or for some simple like factual retrieval, the prompt probably doesn't matter that much. But when you're trying to build a system, or when you're trying to have it perform a complex set of tasks, the prompting matters a lot, and you can end up with really silly results if you're not very, very careful and explicit in what, how you want it to accomplish the thing, not just, get rid of all the bugs. Well, I lose all of my code. That's not the way that I wanted to get rid of all of the bugs, unless it's like a slap in the face that none of your code was any good and it was all full of bugs. So none of it was worth keeping. But it illustrates, I think, the challenge, that we've experienced a short term, but gives perspective on, what's a responsible way to deploy this in a critical and meaningful business operation.
That's the original Peter Steinberger interview with Lex Friedman. I kind of came away from that like, all right, this tool in you and I's hands, who really don't understand programming at all, is going to be extremely useful, but far more useful in someone like Peter's hands, who understands coding deeply and has been coding for 2 decades or 3 decades. That is clear to me. And I think a lot of the pitfalls that we run into with Tug or any other application we built, this is where that stuff really falls down. Is you got to know, you got to understand what the likely pitfalls just ahead are. So, there we go. All right, Jeff. Well, Starbucks CEO on AI, commenting on their ability to use it one way or another. What do we get there?
Yeah, so one of the news feeds that I listen to regularly is the Wall Street Journal's What's News podcast. 10 to 15 minutes morning and night, talking about different stories around the country and globe, primarily business focused. There's a short segment here I was going to play for you, Mark, to just get your response. We're testing my audio-visual skills here on the episode today, so we'll see if this one plays as anticipated. But there was a probably 5 or 6 minute segment where the podcast host was interviewing the CEO of Starbucks, and I thought this little segment on his perspective on AI in their business specifically, it resonated well with me. So I don't think you've heard this yet. We'll get your reaction as I play it, but we'll kick it off and we'll see what you have to say.
Quite committed to the humanity aspect of it at a time when, at least in Silicon Valley, the whole theme this year is trim headcounts, embrace AI. I bet you've been pitched that AI could take an order pretty quickly and wouldn't need a 401k. How do you respond to that?
Don't get me wrong. We're going to be leveraging technology behind the scenes, but I want AI and technology to enable our barista to provide a better moments of connection or free them up to spend more time on their craft and the ability to present that human-to-human experience. And I'll give you a great example. Even in our drive-through, we've experimented with, hey, do you use like an AI tool to take the order? And what we found is you're still better off having a person interact with our customer through the order experience. And then behind the scenes, we're using AI to listen to what that order is so that it gets inputted into the point of sale machine correctly, accurately, and then also can track where the order is so that by the time you get to the window, the drink is made and ready to go. But we've protected that human to human experience even through the order board.
Probably a good place to stop there. But what are your thoughts about the marriage of AI in this kind of human experience that they're still trying to preserve, Mark?
I do think, at least in short order here, I think the biggest uplift is subject matter expertise able to efficiently employ AI in what it's doing, in preserving the pieces of the interaction or the business that are like critical and most value add. I think that's really where it is. And I see you and I as appraisers in the space and trying to understand AI, that I hope that we can be really good at wise implementation of AI in areas that don't make what people value about our service worse, but actually make it better. And that isn't whole replacement. I say that loudly to all prop tech firms and all that are out there trying to. I think it is just not the right direction to try and replace a lot of these folks. That's just not going to get it there, at least in the short term.
Makes a lot of sense. And I see a lot of parallels with this and what you were just talking about with Peter Steinberger and the lift that an AI coding agent is for somebody who already knows coding and programming deeply to then augment their abilities. I think in the real estate space, whether it's valuation or sales or mortgages, I think the same thing can be true. There are things you're not going to know if an agent is lying to you or screwing something up, on the valuation side, for example, if you don't know valuation theory and application and practice as well. And so it's way better, for an appraiser, a valuation professional to leverage the technology to make them better at their craft, just like what the Starbucks CEO was talking about in the Starbucks world. I felt like there were a lot of, parallels there when you've got a question, a concern, a challenge. You can ask a chatbot for sure, but if you've got a qualified professional who's been in the market and seen things, there's still this physical aspect to a lot of what the services that we provide in the real estate space, just like with Starbucks. And you have to remember that AI is living in a digital world. It can ingest photos and images and stuff, but it doesn't see and interact with all of the physical aspects, that real estate is. And so, that resonated. I thought it was worth sharing. I see it a lot the same way, that you can leverage it to be better at what you do. And I think that's probably the mandate to be successful in this future that's coming and feels like is almost here.
Jeff, I have had flashes that date me and wish we had a little more podcasting publishing bandwidth than we do. But talking about AI living in a digital world brings me to the Madonna song, Material Girl Living in a Material World. There's some sort of a spoof song to make of this. I don't know what it is, but you and Madonna, I don't know. There's something there.
We feel like a match made in heaven. No doubt. I'm sure our personalities align. She probably cares about the economy and real estate, no doubt. Well, Tug, gauntlet thrown down. Get us a spoof song of Madonna's "Material Girl."
There you go.
Mark and I will have to place a bet as to who has to sing it, and maybe that'll motivate us to get Tug a voice so he can do the singing.
Well, it should be Tug using our voice. Let's see what you can do, Tug. That would be the biggest ROI of this entire 12-week effort into Tug would be that output. And
probably the thing that does go viral out of all of the stuff that we've done.
Yeah. So lastly, Jeff, just on this AI front, I mean, we have another study, and this is very similar to the Citrini research paper that was put out that was kind of describing a economic world where AI was as successful as we think it can be. And, some good and some bad. And this is a study from University of Pennsylvania and Boston University that is sort of, I think, stating the obvious, but with good data and metrics around it. But it's ultimately this economically suicidal path that we as business people are heading down, which is that every task or job that we automate results in a layoff, that results in a reduction of disposable income for the American citizen, and ultimately reduces the demand for the product that the business delivers in the first place. So it's this sort of cycle. And we know that there is no business that is going to be able to get out away from efficient or optimizing their expense structure and automating tasks where they can. And it's a really curious place for us as society to be in here, kind of wrestling with these tools and the effect on the economy. I'm sure you've got some comments. I don't have much more than that, but maybe just a finishing on a hugely negative, sad tone here, Jeff, is that topic.
I think I'd have rather finished with me and Madonna, frankly, Mark. But,
what a statement, but you're right.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Maybe we'll start with that again. It's interesting that sometimes what's in your best interest as a company or an individual isn't necessarily in the best interest of a larger subset, of market participants or the economy as a whole. It might make sense to optimize profitability and cut headcount in favor of inserting AI into most aspects of many businesses. And that may have a large negative impact on employment, on the economy that becomes kind of self-spiraling. It's an interesting thought exercise of what if there's so much utility in artificial intelligence that there's not enough work or jobs, for people that need income still to be coming in. There's ideas of universal basic income that, maybe is a way to bridge that gap that injects the government deciding how much money you should make or whatever. I mean, definitely negative or potential negatives with that. So far in the past, my take, Mark, is that every time there's been a technological revolution, jobs and the economy have adapted to the technology. Now, this is changing so quickly that maybe it changes faster than the economy and new jobs in an AI world can adapt to. So jury's out on that, but I could see that being a possible path forward and not just this downward spiral that Citrini and this, was it Penn State, did you say? University of Pennsylvania?
University of Penn. Yeah, UPenn.
Came out with. It's an interesting thought exercise. I mean, that is a possible way forward as well. I hope, obviously, that's not what ends up playing out, but I don't think it's inevitable that it has to.
As you think about this changing world going forward, it feels like a very, like it was this way, and the next day you woke up and it's now this new way. The amazing consideration here is that we are now 5 years into this change. This is happening. That is very clear to me. And we are going through with the different jobs reports from quarter to quarter or month to month, kind of changing and going up and down. And maybe AI isn't having the impact on the job market you thought it was, or look at that number. Yes, it is. We are in we are within the transition. We are living within the transition right now, like it or not. And in the moment, we're absorbing it. And there are losers and there are winners in this right now. It feels like quite a bit more losers than winners in the moment. Hopefully we shift quickly, but it's begun, and we are heading down the path of these automations.
No doubt. I mean, I think that's an important takeaway, Mark. It's here and it's going to continue to evolve. And like we've been doing, and definitely one of the themes of the podcast is you may as well adopt and learn as best you can. It's bumpy and it's ugly and it's painful sometimes falling down and making mistakes, but trying to keep up with where things are going and at least be able to direct them in your own life and business at some level, to me, is better than just sitting back waiting for whatever is going to happen to you and hoping that the inevitable doesn't happen. But artificial intelligence is not getting put back in the bottle, as far as its influence and where it's going. So we'll continue to share our perspectives as we fumble along with it. But there are definitely moments of, man, this is really cool and really exciting, and moments of, man, this isn't as great as I'd like for it to be yet either.
Taylor Swift's Travis Kelce episode in the books here, Jeff. Enjoyed it. Look forward to next week.
As always, thanks, Mark.